Check it.
Welcome to Wage Cucking with Jmo.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Wage Cucking with Jmo. Today we have Leslie Lamb on the podcast. Leslie, how you doing?
Doing very well. Thanks so much, Jmo. Thanks, Andreas, for having me.
Cool. Before we get started, you want to give me a little bit of your history in crypto, like how you got into crypto and what have you worked on in the past?
I think we've all been in crypto for a long time now. Probably not as long as you guys, but my foray into crypto started in 2012. One of Coinbase's early users and was a happy user, as that was one of the only options around at that time. And so I've seen a lot in crypto over the past 10 years, right? Crypto being brought mainstream into the hands of a lot of people. And over that time, I've seen 2 bull markets and 3 bear markets. And so I think this past bear market is one I care very, very deeply about because it's impacted so many people comparatively to any other one prior to that. And, you know, on the one hand, that is a good sign. That is a good sign that crypto has reached so many people in the world. But it's unfortunate that because of the size of the collapse of crypto this time around and how many individuals, not just corporates or people who, you know, would consider themselves sophisticated crypto traders, just because of the sheer types of investors there are in the space now, you know, for us, it's really important to figure out how to help the industry move forward by first helping the industry recover, right? So I've seen a lot in the space, but right now my sole focus is on this recovery aspect of crypto. You know, I want to be around for many, many more years, and I want to see the industry back on its feet, whatever that means. And we want to make sure that the next generation of crypto users are holding exchanges and other platforms to a new standard. So that they can have a much safer experience. They can have just an overall better experience because of the lessons that we've learned, you know, over the past couple market cycles, in particular, the last market cycle.
Okay, so I guess talk a little bit about like the exchanges or the projects you worked on prior to this venture in OPNX.
Sure. So prior to OPNX, I was with CoinFLEX, Chief Marketing Officer at CoinFLEX. And prior to that, I worked with Amber Group here in Hong Kong. So Amber Group, large crypto finance platform, and grew a lot during the time that I was there, and, you know, had a big focus eventually on the retail sector, and, you know, definitely benefited from the bull market that happened in crypto over the course of 2020, 2021. And so, yeah, that was a lot of the work that I did in Asia was with Amber Group, and they become a very big player here in APAC. And prior to that, hopping around different projects in between UK and also Hong Kong, actually. But my path in finance really started in New York. So I was with Brown Brothers Harriman, which is a private wealth management firm in New York. And that's where I got my start and actually introduced crypto to a lot of folks there, wrote one of the first regulatory, not papers, I wouldn't go so far to say that, but articles that was included in the FX Quarterly at the time on regulation for crypto across the different jurisdictions. And at that time, it was, you know, 2017, super early. But, you know, it's been really interesting, right, to see people's responses to the idea of crypto. A lot of it has been static, right? They'll take every chance they get, especially the last crypto collapse, and say, look, this is the reason why we are not in crypto, or this is the reason why I continue not to be in crypto. It's because of collapses like this. So definitely a couple people from that era who maintain that state of mind. But I've also known a lot of people since then that have come around and want to still be in the industry regardless of what's happened, because, you know, COVID has changed so much of the world and their understanding of alternative finance, right? So it's been interesting to kind of see how things have changed in terms of perception around crypto since the banking days.
I actually didn't realize it was pronounced OpenX. I've been just saying OPNX
OPNX, OpenX. Yeah.
I've never heard anybody say OpenX until now. That's good to know. Okay.
So before we start talking about OpenX, I wanted to talk a little bit about your time in CoinFLEX and the whole CoinFLEX situation. So for the listeners or watchers who are unaware, CoinFLEX was a Bitcoin Cash centered exchange that had some liquidity issues earlier last year, I believe, and a lot of the blame or a lot of the fault was placed on Roger Ver, who is like the biggest proponent of Bitcoin Cash. Essentially, at least in my understanding, you could clarify this, but in my understanding, he had large leverage positions, probably longing BCH, using BCH as collateral, and there wasn't enough liquidity in order to, liquidate him. He had a non-liquidation account. It was, I guess, sort of expected that he would pay his debt eventually, and he didn't, which led to the loss of funds. But yeah, I just want to know I know there's a lot you can't talk about. There's like court proceedings going on and stuff like that, but I wanted to know if there was like any update on the status of CoinFLEX and more importantly, the relationship with CoinFLEX, the Flex token to OpenX, as I see, I believe the Flex token is migrating as a fee-paying token to OpenX.
Yeah, and one thing to remember is Leslie, and you're married to Mark, who was the CEO of CoinFLEX. A lot of people didn't know that.
Yes, that's true.
Anyway, go on.
Yeah, so CoinFLEX is really the first company to successfully complete restructuring, right? So we went through a lot throughout 2022, but was able to secure over 98% of our creditor base in the form of an approval from the creditor base to enact a restructuring plan. And earlier this year in March, we successfully came out of that restructuring and now are on a path forward to making our creditors as whole as possible, right? So that in and of itself has taken a lot of hard work, a lot of effort into making sure that the users that we had on the platform that eventually became creditors through this debacle are able to see a path forward with CoinFLEX in the form of OpenX, at least as many of these users as possible, right? Not everyone would be eligible to use OpenX. For example, if you're in a prohibited country or you're a prohibited national, everyone on OpenX needs to be KYC'd on the platform. But point being that, we recognize a lot of the pain that has come about through this ordeal with the defaulting client. And what's important is that we've learned a lot of lessons, right? A lot of lessons around risk management. Again, at the beginning of the conversation, I said, people should expect a new standard when it comes to who they're facing as a counterparty. Whether that be an exchange or some other type of trading platform, right? So for us, it's important to recognize, yes, we had a defaulting client who had a manual margin agreement on, which wasn't uncommon, but that is the reality. We extended that manual margin agreement, but going forward, not allowing for manual margin to be enabled on the platform. Right, our risk system isn't allowed to go negative. So what that means is, compared to what was in place on the CoinFLEX side, the risk management measures in place are now much, much more aggressive, so that we ensure nothing like that happens ever again. And I'm hoping other exchanges have learned from this and also recognize that just because in the short term, perhaps everything checks out and the counterparty fulfills a need of the platform in the form of liquidity, that you don't compromise long-term longevity for sake of short-term returns, if I can call it that, right? Short-term performance, rather. So that's been a really big lesson for us. I can talk a lot more about the transparency measures that we'll be taking later in the conversation as you guys see fit. But top level is we're really wanting to take transparency and put that into practice, going beyond proof of reserves, going beyond just transparency in the form of lip service, right? Because at the end of the day, that is a lot of how centralized platforms think about and communicate transparency. It kind of only goes so far. And up until this point, it has been limited compared to DeFi, let's say, right? Where that's an inherent principle. So that's really the lesson learned there from the CoinFLEX side of things. Towards your second question about migrating Flex token to OpenX, a big part of that reason goes back to our community, right? Our creditors form a very big part of our community. A lot of them have been with us since the very beginning as supporters in the form of being Flex holders, right? Not everyone traded on the platform, but they rooted for our success. And even through this process, going through restructuring and post restructuring, as well as we figure out again a path to make our creditors as whole as possible, have stuck around and said, look, we hope that OpenX will have this on the platform. We hope the experience will be such that new users on OpenX benefit from all of the great products that CoinFLEX ultimately created, that the infrastructure supported, right? But through more secure means. And this is how we think about that, right? So in the form of giving feedback, basically, is what I'm saying. Our community is really the centerpiece of our ecosystem, and making sure that we can continue to reward them and continue to bring them along in our growth, right? Because OpenX is a continuation ultimately of the CoinFLEX mission to bring as many assets onto order books as possible, making sure that we take care of our community in that way and bring them along with us and continue to bring value to the token itself by way of growing OpenX, the exchange. I think that is a very, very profound part of our mission, and is ultimately the reason why we wanted to make sure that Flex then becomes the centerpiece of the OpenX ecosystem. Then we can add utility basically to the token. So yeah, right now it's primarily a fee-paying currency, but we will be introducing a number of utility measures around that, so people can actually get more out of the use of Flex in the same way that they were able to by the end of CoinFLEX.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is the circulating supply for Flex going to stay the same, as in like it's going to be converted 1-to-1 as the same token for the OpenX exchange, or is there additional supply for, let's say, new OpenX users?
Yeah, so Flex has a fixed supply. It has a maximum supply of 100 million tokens, and that doesn't change for Flex. So actually, it's already live. Like if you are an OpenX user, you can buy Flex and you can hold Flex, you can trade Flex, and the tokenomics for the Flex token particularly remains the same. Yes.
Yeah, so I think CoinFLEX before the whole fiasco went down was doing really good things. I mean, you talk about community quite a bit, but CoinFLEX was one of the only companies that was supporting the BCH community. I feel like a lot of the natives, or a lot of the high hype has died down for BCH in the past few years, but CoinFLEX was there actively building new products using the Bitcoin Cash chain. One of them being a sort of smart contract decentralized finance protocol using the SmartBCH bridge. Essentially, you could bridge assets back and forth at 1-to-1. And when CoinFLEX went down, the whole SmartBCH situation rubbed me a bit the wrong way, because the way I see things in DeFi, it shouldn't really be related to the centralized exchange. Like the bridge, in theory, should have all assets backed 1-to-1. People that use the bridge or use SmartBCH shouldn't really be exposed to the centralized exchange at CoinFLEX. Like they don't KYC. I believe they don't KYC through CoinFLEX in order to use the bridge. Do you have any takeaways on the situation with the SmartBCH assets? I guess like moving forward, how we should design decentralized finance protocols, even if they're run by like a centralized entity.
Yeah, so I think early on, making sure that the path to decentralizing operations actually happens quicker, sooner than later, not compromising convenience for technical infrastructure needs, if I can
Mhm.
call it that. Because ultimately, that was the direction that things were supposed to be headed for Smart BCH, right? CoinFLEX was not meant to be the permanent bridge for
Mhm.
these users. It's just, it was because we were so crucial, or played a large part rather, to the BCH ecosystem, that when Smart BCH launched as a project, we were already so familiar with the founders, Kui and the rest of the
Mhm.
team, and also the community, by way of rapport. And obviously, our defaulting client was also a very big part of that community, and was a big proponent of it. That there was that inherent trust that was there, right? It's a very sensitive word, I think, for everyone in crypto, but ultimately, choosing CoinFLEX as the temporary bridge was the result of inherent embedded trust that all parties had.
Mhm.
And so the idea was that we would do away ourselves, being that bridge, and that ultimately
Mm.
that would, decentralize. But really, the outcome, of course, I'm with you in that it is unfortunate that the smart BCH users were tied up, in this process, because a lot of them ultimately weren't CoinFLEX users, right? They just needed to use the bridge because it was
Mm.
facilitated by CoinFLEX. But ultimately, the reasoning is because they were creditors, and we can't separate one creditor from another and pool creditors into different buckets. You know what I mean? Ultimately, everyone became the user base, and the user
Mm.
base became the creditor base. And in order for us to get to a point of doing something, and for us, doing something was actually going through restructuring, or getting a plan put together for restructuring, getting
Mhm.
creditor approval, to make sure we implement the restructuring. And then, in the most positive outcome, it would be coming out of restructuring, completing that process. Everyone needed to be treated the same. And that was really the reasoning behind how we facilitated that process, kind of post, post the fiasco, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
But, learnings, I think, really is, if progressive decentralization is needed, if there is the merging of DeFi and CeFi in the form of operations, that we really put into place the ability for that decentralization to happen as soon as possible, and make that bridge time, pun not intended here, but that bridge time as short as possible, right? For sake of the end user, so that there isn't this expectation that trust is needed, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to be working towards as
And
well. Yeah, bring DeFi
and
principles in. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, when we talk about it now, it's very obvious to me that smart BCH bridge should have just been done on Thorchain or something. Like, why? It seems every time an exchange runs a bridge, there's going to be a problem down the line.
Yeah, it also, I mean, it also, at least in my eyes, it doesn't necessarily align with the overall goals of,
Yeah.
decentralized finance. Like bridges, even if it's from like layer one to layer two, or like from layer one to layer one, should eventually, like, I don't know if like the technology is there right now to support fully decentralized bridging.
Yeah.
But like eventually, I see a world where you could bridge assets from one chain to another, like in a trustless, fully decentralized system. But I guess it sort
They,
of makes sense that, like,
yeah.
in the meantime, that there needs to be some technological advances for that to happen. And like before that, we're kind of stuck where we are right now.
Lots of lessons learned, being taken away from this last market cycle.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit about OpenX. Essentially, from what I understand of OpenX, you'll be able to trade claims of these various companies or projects that you may have claims against, or debt with. So you want to describe the whole process of like onboarding customers, like if I'm owed money by Celsius or FTX, how would I go about trading my claims on the exchange?
Sure. I'll give a bit of context as well, just to the size of this market and how underserved it is. Over 20 million people around the world are affected by the recent string of crypto collapses, right? And by not being able to access their trapped funds on these insolvent platforms. And the notional size is something like, $20 billion locked up. Obviously, the largest estate of these is FTX. It's also the most complicated. Celsius, as you mentioned, is relatively clean, but if you are following the bankruptcy proceeding, it's in and of itself complicated and been subject to delays, right? Different bidders now, coming into play. And ultimately, what creditors are subject to is this dependency on the bankruptcy proceeding. Bankruptcies for crypto companies is relatively new. And I'm glad, again, it's a double-edged sword, right? The fact that it is a thing now means it's impacted a lot of people. But the fact that they exist is obviously a negative thing, right? It means something went wrong along the way. There are too many dependencies, and that's why they're all concentrated in this one window, right? This last market cycle. And we have to sort all of that out as we get into the next bull market, I think. And, hits to my point of setting a new standard to make sure that what happened in the last market cycle doesn't extend into this next one. But our mission here, again, is to help the industry recover. And a lot of these creditors, I'll use creditors and claimants sort of interchangeably here, but they don't have a lot of options, if any, right? The current incumbent approach is to do this OTC. If you want to trade your claim, you are going to like one of two platforms, maybe, if not just doing it informally. If a buyer approaches you and says, hey, I'm willing to give you X cents on the dollar for your claim. Now, ultimately, what are these claims priced as OTC? They're priced to how desperate are you to sell?
Yeah.
Ultimately, right?
Yeah, it's basically how much you need the liquidity immediately.
Yes.
And the prices are all over the place, just all over the place.
Exactly. There's no way to figure out the fair value of this claim that you're holding. Again, because there are just so many dependencies, right? And unless you're hiring some bankruptcy lawyer, which costs money and it costs time as well to figure that out, unless you have someone digging through the paperwork and following what exactly is happening and basically advising you throughout the whole process of the transaction and saying, right, that offer that you're getting right now, or that bid that you're getting right now, for your claim, that's a fair price. Unless you have someone that's advising you in that capacity and you have the money for it, you just don't have an option right now, especially if you're talking about the $2,000 claimant, the $5,000 claimant, right? This amount, whether it's small or big, that's all relative, right? To some people, that's a write-off immediately. I don't even want to think about it. To a lot of people, that's actually a big part of their liquid net worth. So what we're trying to do by tokenizing claims and bringing claims onto order books is by opening up access to claims trading to claim holders of nearly all sizes, right? If you're $100, well, it doesn't make sense, but for us, the minimum for Celsius is going to be $2,000. Okay. And that is a meaningful opening of access, right? Because right now, with tokenizing the claim, what we're able to do is offer fungibility of tokens. And when you offer fungibility in the same way that, crypto assets benefit from it, we're able to pool liquidity. And when we're able to pool liquidity, you actually can see that, wow, the depth of liquidity on the order book can be meaningful, because no longer is it Jmo's claim and Andreas's claim. If our claims, if both of your claims, for example, are of the same, call it risk class, meaning maybe your claims are clean and they don't have preference risk, then your claims will be pooled in the same class and will be, tokenized. And if I'm the buyer, I'm not buying Jmo's claim or Andreas's claim. I'm just buying a Celsius claim, right? They're both being treated the same. And so this is different from OTC, where ultimately, you might have a couple bids, but it's multiple bids to one offer. Right?
Yeah, it's like counterparty to counterparty directly instead of like an open market.
Exactly. And I love the fact that you use open market. Exactly. That's, that's what we're building towards. And so you have that scalability all of a sudden, you meaning the platform can offer that scalability, right? And also transparency around pricing, because it's market-based pricing. It's not my pricing, as Leslie for my claim. It's market-based pricing based on the buyers and sellers and, what they're willing to bid and offer at. So these advantages that come with tokenizing claims should be extremely meaningful for the end user, whether you want to access liquidity immediately by trading your claim, right? Selling your claim for crypto and then maybe off-ramping that, or, and then this is the case for a lot of people, especially FTX creditors. They want to continue to be in crypto. They're waiting for access to these funds so that they can go long again on whatever coin, right? They don't want to leave crypto altogether. So being able to give additional utility to the claim by allowing people to benefit from something called portfolio margin, right? And being able to use your claim as collateral to trade crypto futures, that in and of itself is meaningful, because if you're one of these guys, you're actually being able to unlock value from an asset that inherently has value, regardless if it's 10 cents, 15 cents. The fact that it's priced at something means that it has value. So having it go from being dead capital, right, to being something that you can unlock and use, and to, maybe make back what you lost through a number of trades, right? A lot of people think that way. That's utility,
for sure.
And that is part of how we're trying to get crypto or this type of liquidity to flow back into the crypto market, sort of one by one, right?
Yeah.
So that's the big picture, the setup of the reason why we're doing this in the first place, and some of the advantages of that. But in terms of the actual onboarding, I think here's where it's important to be able to lay out like who's involved, right, on the back end, who's involved in just building this platform altogether. So OPNX has partnered with a tokenization solution provider called Heimdall, and Heimdall manages the onboarding, the verification, and the tokenization of the claim. So let's say, Jmo, you are an OPNX user, right? You have KYC'd on the platform. Once you KYC, you will be able to access this claims portal to begin your claim transfer application. Once you once you fill out a few details, you are then brought to Heimdall's site to complete the claim transfer application, because they are the ones who are managing a bulk of the onboarding and the verification. That's the most important part, right? As with any other speculative asset, you can imagine there's lots of fraud involved here. Lots of people who want to spam this or that and, give fake documents with fake claim details.
Absolutely.
So there needs to be a lot of checks and balances put into place, a lot of verification points, and Heimdall not only just takes in the information to verify that, for example, basic level, what you provide in form submission fields actually checks out with the documentation that you provide, that you get ultimately from the claims agent, but they also double check this information with the claims agent as well, right? So there's lots of different checks and balances throughout this process to ensure that ultimately the information that is provided the claimant that is applying is a legit claimant, and they have a legit claim to transfer. So if you don't pass these checkpoints, you're not able to transfer your claim, and there's no way around that. But let's say you pass everything and you're eligible to transfer your claim. When you do that, right, when you get to that transfer part, what you're doing is actually transferring your claim to a dedicated trust. The sole purpose of this trust is to custody the claim. So in that sense, the custody aspect of the claim is ring-fenced from any one party from going under, whether that be Heimdall or OPNX. And once the trust custodies the claim, basically the trust tells Heimdall, this is okay to be tokenized. So Heimdall tokenizes the claim, and the claim is made tradable on OPNX. So that's the flow from
So
application.
a quick question about that. So like assuming, like, for example, let's say the Celsius debt gets settled or paid out within like a year or so. Do the funds go directly to the trust, or do they go to Heimdall, or do they go directly to OPNX? Like, what is the flow of the money?
Yeah, so the funds would be distributed from the trust, right? Because the trust is the sole custodian
Okay.
for those claims, right? And there might be different classes of claims, which means there are different trusts corresponding
Okay.
to each class of claims, right? As I
Uh-huh.
mentioned to you before, the risk associated with your claim might be different from Andreas, or it might be
Uh-huh.
the same, right?
Okay.
So depending on those factors, they will be custodied in different trusts. But let's say the assets were ready to be distributed, they would be distributed out of the trust. So when you transfer your claim, you're giving up your legal right to the underlying claim
Okay.
while keeping the economic benefit of having the claim by way of being able to trade the claim on OpenX.
Okay, so when the eventual payout happens, you wouldn't have to trust the individual to collect the funds and then settle the funds with the trust. The funds would go directly to the trust itself.
Yes. Yes.
And is there any costs for the users for onboarding this process? It seems like a very extensive process.
Yeah, so it sounds extensive because I'm trying to explain every part of it, but honestly, for Celsius, and I can only speak to Celsius, right? Every estate is going to be different based again on the complexity of the of how the bankruptcy is being handled. But for Celsius itself, the turnaround, if you had all of your information, again, this is like a one click, you pass and you get notified, it can be done in minutes, actually.
Okay.
So that is something that's really important. This is not you submit your application, then like 3 weeks later, you're notified that you're eligible to transfer your claim, right?
So you talked a little bit earlier about being able to use your balances for margin borrowing, I believe. So are you looking to add more markets outside of just like spot trading for claims?
So claims itself will only have spot trading, but the beauty is because we already have portfolio margin as a feature, and FTX had portfolio margin, right? Bybit has portfolio margin.
Yeah.
I hope more exchanges have portfolio margin because it's actually very beneficial to traders. As you guys know, every dollar is very meaningful. So if you can access additional trading capital with the assets that you already have in your portfolio, you're better off, right? So what we're doing is adding claim as an additional asset that you can use as collateral and borrow USDT with on the platform.
Okay, so it's just a market where you can borrow, but are you going to have like traditional, crypto to crypto markets that people can trade using your balances as collateral?
Yeah. So we are also a crypto trading exchange as well.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay.
No, I just checked it out. There's spot markets, there's perps, there's a thing called repo, which I don't know what it is.
Yeah. So repo was our lending market on CoinFLEX, and we brought that over to OpenX, but it's more of a complicated concept that the average crypto user, whether you be sophisticated or not, this is not a level of how much you understand how to trade, right? It's just the concept of repo and using it as a lending market isn't necessarily the de facto thing that is advertised in the crypto world. So really the focus right now for us as we build up liquidity is on the perp side of things. Spot, obviously it's a given. That's what we need to have on the platform, and will be the initial market for claims. But perps really fulfill the sort of liquidity demand that users have and will definitely have on the platform over time. And we hope to allow people to actually make use of their claim ultimately. And so there's a whole process to that. You apply for your claim to be used as collateral, but again, it's giving people option, right? For something that quite honestly doesn't have any options if you're not trading it on the platform. Your only option then is to sell, right? Or you can buy if you don't have a claim and you really want one, obviously you can buy. So we obviously cater to both sides of the market. But it's wanting to give claim holders the freedom to choose what they want to do with their claim.
So I believe the OpenX site tweeted about there was a bit of controversy with like the first few days of the launch of the site, where they released their like 24-hour volumes and they were quite low. And then I feel like a lot of people like looked upon that negatively. But then I believe it was you, or it was like the OpenX site came out and said that we're not using internal or external market makers, and a majority of the people can't even onboard right now. So that's why the volumes are low. Is there a reason why you've decided not to go with the market making route to add more liquidity to these markets when people are able to onboard?
So really the challenge with any new marketplace, especially a two-sided marketplace, is bootstrapping liquidity, right? This isn't a CeFi problem. It's not a DeFi problem. It's every marketplace problem. Yeah. And you kind of touched on a core of it already. So actually, thanks for reading through the tweets and trying to make sense of it.
Of
course. So part of the reasoning is exactly what you said. It's, we know that having an internal market making team just doesn't work. We know that because FTX was a classic example, if not the example, for why it doesn't work, because an exchange shouldn't be put in a position to compete with customers, right? I think we can
conflict of interest.
All agree on that. Exactly. Yeah. Conflict of interest. Now, on the other hand, there is this idea, well, couldn't you just line up a bunch of market makers, give them preferential treatment, have separate agreements signed, so that on day one, when you unleash the nozzle, if you will, you have liquidity day one. Sure, that is possible, but it's not a dependency that we want to have, because ultimately, how you want liquidity to play out on an exchange, particularly, is through a diverse set of hands, right? It goes back to the point for CoinFLEX as well, from a liquidity perspective. Sure, this defaulting client, did a lot of activity on the platform, right? Was a great user ultimately of a lot of the products on the platform. And maybe it was this dependency that we had on this particular client that, led to this aspect of, well, trust, right? If they're doing a lot on the platform, then we're trusting, right, that this user is a very big part then of a lot of the economic activity that's happening, right? And so now going back to the whole, market making conversation, we don't want liquidity to be concentrated just in a few hands, right? If these market makers decide, look, they want to just turn off altogether, then we go from, let's say, really great liquidity to, dearth of liquidity within a couple of days. And that is a whole explanation we would need to have, right?
And I guess that actually did happen like 2 days ago. Not for you, but for some other markets, I believe there were some market makers started pulling out a bit. So we'll find out.
Please find out. I mean, that would be a great, not great, but I mean, it's a case study, right? For
you would have to,
what happens.
Yeah, you would have to read the Chic.com newsletter this weekend. I believe it was, I forgot. It was Jane Street, Jump, Radix, Tower pulling out of the US and slightly globally as well.
Yeah, so it's that dependency that we don't want to have, because it is ripe for abuse, right? I mean, whether it be intentional or not, maybe they were hamstrung. I don't know what the situation here is. For regulatory reasons, look, we just can't take part in this activity. Even like whatever the excuse is, the exchange is still beholden to a certain number of market makers, right? And so we want to be able to diversify the number of market makers we have on the platform to ensure that we are building up sustainable liquidity. And that's very difficult. I'm not going to sit here and say we're going to have, tier 1 level liquidity week 1. I mean, that's just not possible, right? If we're doing this in a very organic way. So for us, having this approach of building up a public market making program, making sure that all deals are made publicly available and, communicated transparently, that was really, really important to us. And look, now we have a great meme of 1364. I think CoinDesk reported something like $1.62 or was it?
Yeah,
and,
I remember that. And you guys corrected them in saying it was actually like 1,000% higher. Thank you, CoinDesk.
It's important to look at all the numbers that are available on the markets if we're going to report something like that. But now we have a great meme that early users can remember. But jokes aside here, right? The idea is for us to be trading billions, right? For us, we just passed a new all-time high of like nearly $8 million of daily trading volume. By all accounts, that is tiny. I fully recognize that, right? On an absolute basis, that is tiny. Relative, that means we're growing, right? So that is a good direction. But the end goal here is to be trading billions of dollars a day and figuring out the how, right? The approach to building up sustainable liquidity over time across various markets. And tying this back to actually our conversation on claims, this is where for us, it's really important that for creditors who come to trade claims, that they actually have such a great experience on our platform that they stay for the crypto. And this is the reason why we're adding that utility to claims trading, allowing people to use their claim as collateral to trade crypto futures, Bitcoin and ETH in particular.
Yeah.
Because we want people to experience what it's like to trade all sorts of markets, right? And be able to, again, build up utility / liquidity to a number of different types of users, right? No one wants to trade toxic flow. Market makers don't want to trade against market makers at the end of the day. So, the more diverse the user base can be, I think the healthier the ecosystem will become as well over time as liquidity builds up.
Okay, so are you saying that all the markets on OpenX aren't going to have either internal or external market makers, or just the ones that involve claims?
No, all.
All? Okay.
Yeah, all.
Okay.
No, internal market makers, that's been very unpopular lately. So that's
but I mean,
a good thing.
It's still happening.
So, and by external market makers, third-party market makers, of course, right? So I will rephrase and say through the public market making program or other programs that we have in the future, of course, if you consider that external. But yes, we didn't start off with like one whale, for example, and this one whale will have some manual margin that no one knows about. It's like no one is on manual margin. No one will have manual margin on the platform. Full stop.
So moving on a bit, I wanted to talk about a few, I guess, I don't know how to phrase this, but I guess a few public unpopular opinions or a few public criticisms about the OpenX exchange. The first one being your partners, Kyle and Sue, who are, I guess, like seed investors, and I don't know their exact involvement, but they were formerly Three Arrows Capital, which I mean, I assume that at some point, Three Arrows Capital's creditors will be able to upload their claims on the OpenX exchange. But a lot of people have like quite negative things to say about them, and mainly that they were borrowing funds, like inflating their assets under management, like taking loans from people that they would consider friends, knowing fully well that they couldn't pay it back, essentially recycling collateral. And they may have been the cause of a lot of these creditors or these debt issues. I feel like this is important to talk about, even if they're not involved in the day-to-day operations of the exchange, just because the whole Three Arrows Capital fallout, I feel like they were, at least in my eyes, they were ghosting a lot of people that were looking for them. And I feel like it's important to discuss this for the future of OpenX, because if there are issues with OpenX in the future, and if this is like like a behavior trait, I feel like individuals might not want to use the exchange that are tied with someone that, if things go south, they just ghost you and move on to another project. So do you have any thoughts or comments on them or the whole situation?
Yeah, I appreciate the thinking behind this, right? And trying to understand the implications, because even if we say a particular reality in crypto, at least, or broadly in culture, perception is reality, right? And that's what we have to work with here. So I can't comment on 3AC activity, right? I was never a part of 3AC, nor was anyone else on the team that was formerly CoinFLEX that is now OpenX, right? So I need to clarify that point here. I'm not able to comment on that, but I will comment on Sue and Kyle's involvement in OpenX and how it got started, right? I think that is a big picture question that a lot of people have. There are so many fish in the sea, as people say, right? Why these two? So I don't think a lot of people know that I had known Kyle and Sue already before all of this happened, before things happened with CoinFLEX, before things happened on the Three Arrow side. For us, the conversation around claims and all of that stuff, that sort of came later. We didn't talk because we were thinking, who is best to partner with to get claims live? So that is an important thing to know. If I can bring it back to this, what I actually said at the very, very top of the conversation about, why I'm still here building. It's because I believe that there is a future for crypto, and I think you guys do too. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this podcast. You wouldn't care to ask the questions that you're asking, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in that sense, let's think about the pool of people out there who share the same mindset, who have gone through a fiasco, a debacle, a collapse in their own right, whether it be through a trade or it be through just, look, it wasn't my fault. It just, I happened to be a part of a platform that went bust, right? For anyone who has been in this situation and still wants to see crypto through to the next market cycle and beyond, we can probably be characterized as folks who still want to build or at least contribute some value in the space. And it's about, what is each of our roles in providing that value? Yours will likely look different from mine, which will likely look different from maybe a DeFi project, right? So all throughout actually 2022, and this now brings us to post the 3AC blow up, right? And around that time, CoinFLEX also, had its issues. There was never this sentiment in our conversations that, look, we're just out of here. Like, obviously we needed to decompress and just figure out, like, what are we going to do with our respective situations? But there was never a part of our conversation that said, we're up and out altogether. Let's wrap this thing up, figure out what to do about our creditors, and let's leave crypto. Now, if we fast forward to November, if I'm getting my dates correct here for the FTX fallout, I think it might have been between the second and third week of November. Really, the FTX fallout is what got us thinking and talking about, from a business perspective, if we were to do something, right? What could we do for the market based on the gap that we inevitably anticipate is going to be the case? That gap being, wow, if FTX has gone down, who else is going down, right? I think that was on top of people's minds early on, right? Who was dependent on FTX / Alameda in the form of loans, in the form of investments and all of that stuff? It's going to be a domino effect. And with FTX alone, we already knew that there were going to be millions of people who are going to become creditors, right? We didn't know the notional size at that time, but we knew it was going to be large, right? So if this was going to have a compounding effect, and we knew that at the time that claims were going to be a thing that people held in the form of an asset, right? Like crypto were effectively being turned into claims. And that really the claims market has not matured, has not evolved in the same way crypto has matured. And what I mean by that is, claims at that time had not gone from OTC to order books in the same way crypto has, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that and understanding our mission as CoinFLEX at the time to bring assets onto order books, right? To be able to benefit from all the things that I mentioned already when I talked about claims fungibility and deeper liquidity and all of that stuff. What can we ultimately do with the infrastructure that we as CoinFLEX had already built at the time, right? Because if I can say this, it was never the fault of the tech, right? And I think that's the case for a lot of situations where the exchange ended up going bust. It wasn't necessarily the fault of the tech.
It's just the risk control measurements weren't in place. Yeah.
Yes, right. That is where a lot of the fault is, right? So, but not the underlying tech in a lot of the cases. So this is where Sue and Kyle were extremely instrumental in the early days. It was bringing these realities, these situations, understanding what was the case for CoinFLEX, what was the case and the need for the market, and what could be done, right, to really extend the CoinFLEX mission, should CoinFLEX become, or not become, but remain a business, or become something else, whatever that might be. They were instrumental in coming up with the idea for claims trading ultimately, and bring claims onto order books and figuring out, okay, well, who do we need to partner with to make this happen? Because yes, we had the tech for crypto trading. We at that time had around 60 something odd people still with us, building out the platform, monitoring the platform and the tech. But ultimately, if we're going to be if we're going to be bring claims onto order books, well, that's going to require a whole set of expertise that CoinFLEX at that time didn't have, right? So they were instrumental in figuring out, well, who do we work with here, you know? And so they gelled really the Heimdall team, which at that time wasn't a team, it wasn't a brand, right? But the right people in place for us to make this operation happen at the end of the day. The idea is entirely credited to them. Point being that, you know, that is what I will ascribe a lot of the value and the contribution to when it regards them specifically. And that is something that I can't diminish. From a principle perspective, or out of principle, I cannot, because that is the reality, right? And the fact that we have been able to execute on that reality, and we're continuing to execute, you know, we haven't launched claims yet, but we will. The fact that we have gotten to this point and OpenX is now a thing is attributed to hours and hours of conversation and hours of thinking and guidance and communication with Sue and Kyle on how we can make this a reality so that we can help as many of the 20 million creditors around the world as possible. So the fact that they're still around to contribute in that way, so now they take on more or less an advisor role, right? As I mentioned, they were really active in the early days of putting this idea together and helping us execute on that. But the fact that we can use them as a sounding board, the fact that, you know, they are not off somewhere, just completely cut off from the crypto world, I think says something about their commitment to see crypto through. Again, I can't comment on all of the stuff that has happened, but, you know, I think what we can learn from this is that, look, for people who want to continue to build in the space and see a path forward and actually want to continue to bring value into crypto, well, they're going to be able to find a way to do it. And if they're very present about this and they're very upfront about the value that they want to bring, then the question is, you know, should that be separated from things that have happened in the past, not dismissed, right? Not dismissed, but at least separated. You know, I think that is a fair question for us to ask. And another question maybe that I can ask your audience, you know, is that, you know, if Sue and Kyle were to go into a coma tomorrow, would you use OpenX?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, right? I feel like the only reason I bring it up because I feel like it's very important to discuss these things because the whole optics of the thing, whether it matters or not, like the individual end user is going to look at the whole optics of the thing. And then like the level one thinking is obviously like the team from CoinFLEX, which obviously had this whole default situation, and the team from 3 Arrows Capital, which also had this like whole default situation, are coming together and trying to produce a new exchange. And as like, you know, like a level one base level thinker in like the crypto industry, your average user would say, no, I would not want to use the exchange for these reasons, right? So like I feel like that the optics of the whole thing, at least the public optics of the whole thing, is really important when especially launching a new exchange, to consider like what the end user is thinking or how you're perceived by the end user.
Absolutely. And I would offer a flip side view on what you said there, which is, you know, how do people think about seasoned entrepreneurs? I'm not talking about us, right? I'm talking about generally speaking. You know, if you're thinking about maybe two electronic companies, one, you know, who's run by a Tim Cook-like personality, right? Who's been around, has been with, you know, 10 different companies in the past, and that person is starting a new electronics company, and that person has been around again in the industry for like decades, versus someone who's just out of uni and saying, I have this great idea, and they're going to be building the exact same electronics product. You know, which one would you go for, right? That's another question. A lot of people, maybe both will get backing, sure, right? But a lot of people will go for the one run by a Tim Cook-like personality that has years of experience building out Apple-like products, right? Total example here. Because, you know, I as a user can anticipate a couple things. Well, this person knows what works and what doesn't. They've gone through the evolution of understanding changes to user experience, and they understand what it means to prioritize performance, right? And know what it takes to actually build up a team, just product aside, assemble the team and get the team to be completely on board to deliver this product. Right? Because a lot of the times they say, look, it's not really the product that fails, it's the team that fails, can't get it together. And then like the product never is delivered into the market, right?
Yeah.
So, maybe that's one risk with the, super young entrepreneur who might have this brilliant idea for the product and it gets to the same level ultimately from an execution perspective, but the team falls apart and then like there's no one to continue to build on, that operation. So all I'm saying here is that there are obviously trade-offs to each example, but a lot of people would go for the seasoned entrepreneur because that person comes with a lot of experience, a lot of perspective, a lot of lessons learned at the end of the day. So that is one angle that I think maybe people could be, open-minded to as well. Everyone reserves their own right to think a certain way. But, I would say one, judge us by our execution. Judge us by our delivery, because that is, what I can say upfront as the only thing that, we can really rely on to build up credibility in the market. It's not just lip service, but it's actually what do we put into practice and deliver to the end user. And another one is really this, I don't know if I can keep repeating this point, which is, we come as a team with a lot of experience, with a lot of perspective. We know exactly what not to do. We know what to continue doing because we know what's worked running an exchange for the past, 3.5 odd years. Right. Yeah. And I think those, what could be perceived as negative things could also be perceived as very valuable things at the end of the day. And that is ultimately, I think, what we want, we want users to realize is that yes, it's a new exchange, but it's not a new team, without any prior experience of running an exchange. Maybe an entirely new exchange doesn't come with the baggage. They don't come with, reputational challenges. They don't come with a history, but they come with the unknown, which is, are you capable of being an operator of an exchange? Do you understand how to bootstrap liquidity in the right way that allows users to benefit from sustainable liquidity over time? Do you understand proper risk management protocols and what works and what absolutely doesn't? Do you understand, when maybe have to compromise on certain things between the short term and the long term, and what you can absolutely not compromise on, because that will result in a number of these type of bust situations that we saw in the last market cycle. Do you even understand all of the things that went wrong with FTX that you absolutely shouldn't do, right? Or insert another crypto company. So a lot of these things, again, sure, they are painful experiences, and I never wish them upon any entrepreneur. But I think they give a lot of perspective to founders who want to continue to build and have, again, the right intent, to be able to improve the product and the experience for the end user over time for the next generation of crypto participants.
I think it's important to note here that I understand the whole side of judge us by our execution, and we learned a lot from our past mistakes. But then if you're like, let's say a CoinFLEX creditor or like a 3 Arrows Capital creditor, you might take that with a grain of salt because, you're directly affected by that as well. And there's like thousands and thousands of people that are directly impacted by the actions of, like CoinFLEX or 3 Arrows Capital. So, I mean, like, we don't have to discuss this any further, but I truly hope that that eventually like the OPNX exchange does well, but also all the people that are, directly affected. Like you talk about earlier about how like some of these claims might be for $1,000 or $2,000, which may not seem like a lot to some people, but to other people, that's like a substantial portion of their like life savings. It could mean like, being able to afford like gasoline or groceries for a week, or not being able to afford it. And there are a lot of people in this position that were impacted by this. So yeah, I feel like it's important to note that, and I truly hope that that you and, Kyle and Sue and everybody involved in OpenX, I learned, I guess, from their past mistakes, but more importantly, like eventually makes right on their past mistakes. And, because like the mistakes that everyone has made in the past, even though they impacted them individually, the impact across like everyone it's affected is far greater and far worse than the individual impact.
Absolutely. And that's, that's an entirely fair way to frame the situation. And ultimately, creditors are who we want to be building for. Right now. Yes, again, we are a crypto exchange. We welcome new users. We want to make that extremely clear. We are a crypto and claims exchange, but our focus, right? Our position in helping the industry move forward is by focusing on creditors, because we believe we are the solution for that by tokenizing claims, and making them tradable, right? One following another. So starting with Celsius first, and hopefully following that with FTX and other estates as well, and making sure that we can deliver value to people by allowing them to access funds that they desperately need, and so that they don't have to be stuck in a Mt. Gox-like situation, which is still playing out, right? As most people know,
the Goxing never ends, I believe, is the saying that is now 10 years old. In fact,
yes, I mean, celebrating a decade, right? I don't know if celebrating is even the right word here. It's just it's absurd how long Gox creditors have needed to wait and continue to wait for some outcome that might not even be guaranteed, right? That is 10 years of, for a lot of people, not saying all, but for a lot of people not participating in crypto because they've effectively got burned from that situation. And, even if they were to get access to their funds, they wouldn't put a cent back into crypto because of that experience that they had, and out of fear, right, of losing those funds again. So look, I think I just want to, talk about our situation as it is in the present, as we see it, recognize the pain, recognize the faults, recognize, that there's a lot of hard work to be done here, despite the, very, very big mission. And despite the fact that we've been around for, many number of years, that ultimately doesn't count. The timer goes back to zero now, right? And it's basically starting up, hopefully fresh with this newly gained perspective, to make sure that we do things the right way for our end users across the board, from user experience to security to transparency at the end of the day, making sure that we go beyond proof of reserves to offer something like provable asset backing, where all futures positions and their margin will be made publicly available to users in real time on an anonymized basis, obviously, but made publicly available in real time, and many more other similar features, so that when you come onto a platform, you understand as much as possible the overall health of the exchange, that you don't need to trust our word to know, right, what are the risk controls here, being put into place? How do I know that you aren't extending manual margin? It's like, well, all the information is literally there in real time for you to reference, and that is the whole aim of bringing more DeFi principles into CeFi, right? Not trying to wear a skin that we are not. We are not a DEX at the end of the day, right? Would never claim to be that. But as much of the DeFi principles we can work into our CeFi exchange, I think the better off our end users will be. And I hope that, once we're able to deliver that, that becomes the new standard for exchanges across the board. It is not just proof of reserves out of need, out of obligation, but that there is a desire to see transparency as a product and to be able to innovate on that in the same way that people think about, oh, how can we spin up a yield product? How can we spin up this cool AMM product? Like those are all great and they're really fun problems and challenges to work with. But what about transparency? That really hasn't been quote unquote innovated on since ever, beyond proof of reserves, which always is seen as an obligation to, or not always, since the FTX fallout, has been perceived as an obligation to the end user.
Mhm.
So yeah, basically that is one of our longer term hopes for exchanges in the industry.
So I have two other questions before I let you go today. Basically, sort of two things that were made public that maybe you can like respond to a little bit. The first was like the news came out, I believe, on CoinDesk about the Dubai regulators claiming that OpenX was an unregulated exchange, and the second being the whole investor announcement where you sort of announced like your partners in the venture, and then a few of your partners came out and said that they weren't involved and they wanted to, it seemed like they wanted to distance themselves from the project. You like to comment on those?
Sure. On the first one, look, we're in communication with the Dubai regulator and with other regulators to find the best solution here. We are a fully KYC'd exchange and never had any UAE users. So that is the extent to what I can comment on that one. And, for the investor FUD situation, look, we stand by our word that all of the ones listed, all of the ones named publicly, rather, on Twitter, in the video, and in the post are investors, right? Whether they be investors through CoinFLEX or they be direct investors in OpenX. That I fully stand by, and we as OpenX fully stand by.
I see. So like, I guess you don't have to comment on this, but it seems like a lot of the investors that didn't want to be listed were essentially like investors in CoinFLEX that got their equity converted to OpenX.
So yes, equity through a transaction, right? Might be converted there, transaction ongoing. But look, CoinFLEX was already a shareholder of OpenX. So conversations are ongoing, but we stand by our word that they are investors.
Yeah. So before we let you go today, I think that's all we have. But you want to tell the listeners or users? I feel like there's a lot of people here that would like listen or watch this podcast that at least have like FTX claims, it may have Celsius claims and stuff like that. You're looking at a few right now. But
Yes.
do you have a timeline as to like for these various creditors when the onboarding will begin and where they can participate or where they can find announcements, or like if you have any announcements where they can find you?
Absolutely. So Celsius creditors, you're up first. You can start to onboard on OpenX already, right? You can KYC on the exchange, get started, but you can onboard your claim starting the end of the month. So very, very soon. FTX, we hope for you guys to be second as soon as possible. And
this year.
This year for sure. Yes. Yes, this year.
Do you have anything else lined up, like any other any other?
We're assessing a lot of claims at the same time, but focusing primarily on these two first. But the ones that you see on our website, we are looking to be able to list as many of those as possible. If again, certain situations happen within their own bankruptcy proceedings, obviously that will, be a dependency for whether we list. But that caveat aside, we look to list as many of these claims as possible, starting with Celsius.
Do you want to tell the listeners or watchers what the website is, or what like the Twitter is, and where the announcements are posted?
Yeah, so our website is openx.com. That is www.opnx, as Jmo likes to say it, .com. Our Twitter is @OpenXOfficial. And maybe you can just write this somewhere in the show notes.
We will link.
We will.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, that is where all of the latest information about claims is happening. I will maybe also give a shout out to the Heimdall Twitter handle as well. So it's HEIMDALLRWA.
They're your like third party for onboarding claims, right?
Onboarding, verifying and tokenizing claims. Exactly. And yeah, I would say those main places for announcements. And we have a Telegram community as well. I'll just give you the link, guys, and
Yeah.
you can
Yeah,
post
yeah,
it in the
sure.
show notes.
We can post it at the end of the show.
I just have a feature request. So if let's say you get the claims for Celsius, FTX, and let's throw in GOX.
Mhm.
I think if you get all, you should get an NFT and a T-shirt. If you have claims, if you just got rugged on everything.
The trifecta T-shirt.
If you were, yeah, well, I'm hoping no one is in that position.
So many people. So
Yeah,
many.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
Yeah. But if you are, please think about using OpenX as one avenue to access liquidity. GOX is a whole different beast altogether.
Mhm.
But we'll look to list as many viable claims as possible. And maybe we will give you, something else.
Nice.
Might be the form of NFT or T-shirt, but maybe some, make sure we do reward you for being able to get liquidity. Let's put it that way on our platform with some other swag. So for sure, keep in mind.
All right, awesome. Thanks for coming on, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you.
Good luck with OpenX, and I hope it goes well.
Thanks so much, Jmo. Thanks, Andreas.